So now it's time to cover the trunk of the tree with our bark paper, which I embossed using that Spellbinders embossing folder. Now, even though that is a large embossing folder and it actually will emboss an area that's about 5 inches wide by about 7 inches tall, it's still not, that's enough height, but it's not enough width with the 5 inches. So what we're going to do is join a few panels together. So the first thing we want to do is cut one section that is 3 inches wide, and I have kept it 7.5 inches tall. Even though it's not embossing all the way up here, this little part won't show, but it'll give us some extra material to attach it to the trunk with, which will be helpful. And then I punched a hole, a 1 1/4 inch hole, and it's in the center horizontally, and the top of that hole is 6 1/4 inches from the bottom edge. 6 1/4 from the bottom edge to the top of that hole. And this piece is 3 inches wide. So now I want to join some pieces on either side, but I don't want to just use these straight edges. That'll be kind of harsh. I want to see if I can camouflage them. So what I'm going to do is run a piece of score tape up the edge before I start this technique. And then I think I grabbed some 5/8 inch here. You could definitely just use 1/2 inch. And then what I'm going to do is just pick kind of some lines to go along to cut a kind of a jagged edge here on the edge of this piece of paper. So I'm just kind of starting here at the top and going in and out. The object is to try to get something that is not going to look so uniform so that we can camouflage this join. So I'm just kind of taking my scissors along this edge. Where I run out of a bark line, I just kind of bring it in. And now I have kind of a rough edge here. And let's see. I think that's going to camouflage pretty well. So what we can do here is ink. And I might have some residual ink on my applicator, just so we have a dark edge there. And then we'll be able to join that paper and create a longer section. I'm going to do that on this one, get the pieces joined, and then I'll be back for the next step. I'm back. You can see that I now have one long sheet of my bark paper, and I made sure to burnish where the joins were, and when I was joining the papers I made sure that I kept them in a line on my craft sheet so that the bottom edge would stay even. So now we're going to start putting this on the case, and I've done a little prep work on the trunk on my case, and that is anytime there is a bend in the trunk, I have put a strip of score tape there just so that when we make that bend it won't gap away from there. I didn't need to put any around the knot hole because as you can see here, there's plenty around the knot hole. And yes, I went on the inside here. I probably didn't need to go so high. The paper doesn't go that high, but oh well, I got a little carried away. So what we're going to do is we'll stick the center section down, but only on the middle here of the trunk. I'll remove these two pieces of score tape and the central section only on my piece of bark paper. And then we'll get that attached, and then we'll be able to measure to see how long the two sides need to be. So let me get started with that. And the bottom of the bark paper, I'm holding it up about 1/8 of an inch. So we'll see about 1/8 of an inch of reveal of the brown down there. And you might get a chance to see the top of my head because I have to make sure I stand up and get this straight in order to do this. We'll go lightly at first. See if I can make sure it's staying pretty straight coming around the sides here. I'm just kind of checking on both the bottoms here. That looks pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and burnish that central section down. Not hard, just enough so it'll stick. Okay, so now we've got that on, and we should be able to just kind of wrap this around. And what we want to see is how far do we need to go, and we'll just cut a straight line all the way down here. So you can come and you can take your fingernail or your bone folder or something to help you. The bone folder is actually working pretty well. I've just kind of got a wrap there, and I can see that it's overhanging a little bit to begin with up there, and that's good. I mean, I'd rather cut it a little bit long and then have to come back to it than cut it too short and be sad. So I've got a mark there, so now I should be able to come around here, and where that dent is, I think I'll cut it a little bit long to begin with, just in case it's not straight or something isn't working out exactly as I had hoped. So hopefully that'll just stand nice and tall there. You can brace it with something if you're concerned about it. I'm going to cut this square on my craft mat, and about an 1/8 of an inch too long to begin with. And we'll take a look at that. And it's definitely a little long up there at the top and a little bit long down here. So I'm going to take that 1/8 of an inch off and see how that goes. It's best to work this in sections. Don't get too much in a hurry. We've spent a lot of time on this project, and you know, it's worth it to take your time cutting this off. Let's see what we got now. It's hanging over. I'm going to take it back just a little bit more. I'm going to look down here now. But down here at the bottom, I don't want to take it back as much. So, you know, here's where you can make those adjustments in case things are not exactly straight on there. So down here, take it off about a 1/16, and up here I'm going to take it off almost an 1/8. I'm back. I've added my score tape on. All I needed basically was a strip along the edge and a little bit on the top and bottom, because you know we have these pieces already on the case here. Now before we take all the backing off and we attach it down, we need to make a release cut that comes along the edge of this trunk. And so what I'm going to do is just hold it snugly against there, and I want to make this cut come right along the edge of the root here. So back to, I'm just kind of holding it up a little bit so I can see and mark a point where I want to go back to. and then I can see this edge here, so that's where I want to make my cut. I'll just come in here with my scissors and do that. And now I probably have to come in here and trim that just a little bit off to make it wrap around here a little bit better. So I'm just taking kind of a little wedge out of there so that it now, I've just cut a little wedge out of there. Hopefully you can see this little wedge right there. And I'll put a little ink on there. So that's good for the main trunk part. Now for the, we may need to trim a little bit off of the part that's down here on the root. And the way we'll know that is to check it against our piece of bark that's going to come here for the root. So the root piece, there's a template for cutting the pattern paper on the same page that has leaves 1 and 5, and it says bark template root B, cut 1 mirror image. So you'll cut 2, 1 regular and 1 mirror image. And I just found a shape that I kind of liked, and that's what this looks like here. So this is going to come along the edge here, and I can see that what I really want to do is bring this back by about a 1/16 of an inch here so that it will go underneath the front of this root piece. So I'm going to do that. Just kind of trim this back. And again, we'll give that a little inking. And now, I think that when this piece comes on, that'll be just right. So I'm going to remove my score tape backing, get this piece of the trunk on, and put the decorative paper on the root, and then we'll look at what we have. So now we have our trunk and the front and back roots all covered nicely, and we'll just set that aside for a few minutes and look at our branches and our side roots. Now our branches, remember we have 2 of them. One goes one way and the other one goes the other way. I just used the template that I used to cut out the branches to create my pattern for putting on the bark. Now I did trim it back a little bit so I could have just a little bit of a reveal around the edges, and so I did that for both of these. And then the other thing we want to do, similar to what we did for the big root in the front, is to run a strip of bark along the top and the bottom edge. Now let me measure how big that is. That's a 1/16 greater than 1/4 of an inch, so that is 5/16 inch wide. You can cut this, you know, if you don't want to have a reveal, you can cut it 3/8 inch wide. Excuse me. So I wrapped it around the end down here. This end is going to stick up inside the leaves. It doesn't show. And then the one end, these ends may show a little bit that are next to the part that's going to attach to the tree. So I just wrapped them around when I did that. So let's just, I saved one here to do together with you. So I'm just removing my tape backing, and starting, I cut these 1, 2, 3, 4, about a little over 7 inches long. And I will tell you, you have to be a little fragile or careful with the with these pieces of bark, because once they're embossed, you know, the paper gets a little weaker where that embossing is. So just treat them with a little care and you'll be okay. And if not, you can make that into a feature of the bark just by inking around it or something. Now I'm coming up to where that angle is, and it's just a little bit too wide there for me to wrap, so I'm just cutting just a little sliver off. It's like a part of a 1/16, just enough so that I can wrap it around there. And get it to sit nice and flat inside there. So I've just kind of wrapped it around to the inside there. And then down here on the end, I'm going to wrap this around. I'm just going to cut it off about halfway there. Then I'll burnish that and do that on the other side. And then of course for these that I cut out and have inked, it's just a matter of getting them aligned where you want them. And get that burnished down, and then set those branches aside because we won't put them on until we have the leaves ready. One thing I forgot to say about the branches is you only have to cover the front sides. These back sides won't show, so there's no point in covering them. So now I have both of my branches covered, and I'll just set them aside, and we'll turn our attention now to the little side roots. Now here are my little side roots, and remember when we were making them we said, well, we would add these little flaps on, and I wasn't sure how I was going to add them on, and I said we could either put them on, having them on at the sides, or we would be turning them to the inside. Okay, so I've decided that what we're going to do is turn these to the inside. And so what I have made here in order to do that is just a couple of little pieces of medium weight chipboard that are about 5/8 of an inch wide and 1 5/8 inches long. And all I'm going to do is glue them inside this opening that's back here. Just run a little bead of glue. They'll sit right down inside of this opening, kind of flush with the back. So there isn't anything to glue them against, so just kind of fit them in there and don't press too hard, and everything should be just great. Okay, there's that one, and I'll just let it dry. Now that our little side roots are dry, or at least set up, I'm going to take off this score tape backing and wrap these sides around to the back. And then this top edge may show a little bit. It won't show too much, the little corners might. So I'm just going to take a minute and finish that off and just put a little marker in the corners to begin with, and then just with a little, put a little finishing strip right here on the top. This I'm going to try to measure this pretty accurately. It's or trim it back probably from where I cut it. They're about 3/4 of an inch wide. Oh, that's pretty good. So I've cut this 3/4 of an inch wide, and I'm going to just trim back a little bit, not coming right up to the score line, just shy of the score line, and trimming it back just a little bit on the sides so that I can make a little finishing piece off here at the top. I'm going to try to give this a little pinch when I do this, just so this top edge is as unobtrusive as possible. And of course, come in here and give that a good burnish and hit those corners if they're not cooperating. And I'll do that on my other one, and I'll be back. So I've got the edges finished off of the little side roots, and now I'm going to cover the sides of them with some of our bark paper. And I just used the piece that the template, it's called Side Root D, that I used to create the roots, to also cut my pattern paper, and just trimmed it back a little bit so I could have a little bit of the chocolate brown reveal on the sides there. Now, and you can see, I think, that I just kind of tilted the bark paper to get it so it'd be at an angle, so that when we got to the roots, it would kind of shape around as much as possible, so that we're creating the illusion of that it's actually moving around in a 90-degree kind of an angle, or at least at an angle. So I've just backed these with some score tape to make putting them on easier, and I'll just do that. Now I have my little side roots finished with their sides on, and I want to create the piece that's going to go on the top. Now, what we want to do is not only create a piece that will go on the top of this piece of the root, but also it's going to continue on up the tree. And the way we're going to kind of camouflage that it's coming in is that we're going to taper, and here's one that I did just to show you what it's going to look like. At the top, we're going to just taper along the lines just to bring it kind of into a pointy shape at the top. We keep it, and we'll cut the strip 3/4 of an inch wide to begin with. We may want to trim that off a little depending on how wide your root is and how much reveal you want to have. But I cut it 3/4 of an inch wide. The length of the embossing, you could even cut it on this one I'm going to demonstrate on. I'll leave this bottom on, and it can actually help to wrap around the bottom. But 3/4 inch wide, and at least 3 1/4 inches up of straight. But well, let me not get ahead of myself. What I'm looking for is a piece of the embossed root paper that there's a piece that naturally comes up to a point. And I can see right here on this one, here's a good example of one that's wanting to come up to a point, or somewhat of a point. It doesn't have to come up to a really sharp point, but then we can bring it down wider below. And so just take advantage of those kinds of places. Look through your scraps from when you cut off the trunk or emboss another piece. And we're going to cut this 3/4 of an inch wide to begin with, and then we will put some score tape on there, and then I'll show you what's next. So I'm keeping that centered there, and that would be 3/8 on each side. So I've got this cut. I'm just checking to see if I want it to be that wide or not. Actually, maybe just a hair thinner, and I think I'll take it from this side. Okay, now some score tape, and I definitely want to have at least one piece that's wide enough to hit that middle section. And I'll just run a little piece of 1/8 down here at the bottom. Doesn't have to come all the way up. Even that's overhanging just a little bit, so I'm just giving it a little cut. Don't want any extra adhesive hanging over the edges there. Okay. Inking the bottom edges here. Alright. Remember that when we're looking at the roots, the pointy end is the part that goes next to the tree. It stands like this is the ground down here with this part that comes up. That's the base. So we'll start by wrapping, and if you're using this part with the non-embossed, make sure you start back about, so you have about 1/4 of an inch or so. That's you don't start right on that edge. And I'm just kind of training it to come up the side here. Alright. And then I'm going to remove my score tape backing. Not all the way at this point. I just want to come up to about where I was thinking about stopping. Actually, I think I'll just angle this back in so it doesn't show on the edges. My scissors are a mess right now. Alright, try this again. Keeping it centered, wrapping tightly. And just trim that backing off, but don't get rid of the backing from the whole back, because you want to do your cutting now. So remember, we're going to kind of follow a natural path to end up at a pointy area, starting at this bottom area where we'll come in from the sides of where we are on that root. And finding something else on the other side to kind of follow down. So we end up with something that's like this. Now we're not going to put this on yet, because when we're working on the leaves and some of the other things, I'll show you that the book can stay relatively flat and easy to move around. But if we were to start adding on these side roots, then we'd have to be very careful about them, and they might, you know, they'd just be too fragile. So what we'll do is, we've got them prepped, I'll prep the other one, and we'll just put them aside until we're nearing the end, and then we will glue them on at the base and get that extension up there on the top. Now this one's a little bit darker, you know, watch your inking. I can come in here before I attach it, maybe just darken up on the side of the trunk so that it blends in a little bit better. But that is how we will deal with the side roots. So where are we at this point? We've got our trunk covered, the main root covered. I will have this other side root down here in a minute here. And we have our 2 branches completed. So that is adding bark to the tree. And next we will be looking at adding the leaves.